Hi and welcome. My name is Devin Simpson and I am the marketing coordinator here at Lucent Biosciences, and I will be your moderator for today. And thank you for joining our webinar on Soileos bioactive crop nutrition products. First off, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Again, we've purposely muted and turned off everybody's videos, but feel free to use the chat at any time. And I just also wanted to let you know we will be recording our presentation so that we can share it with those who are unable to join us. During the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to type those into the Q&A at any time, and we'll try to keep the presentation under the hour time frame so that we can answer some of those questions at the end. Now, let me introduce our speakers. Please welcome Jason McNamee, who is our Chief Product Officer and one of our fearless founders here at Lucent. He will be opening the webinar, and then joining him is Laura Jeffries, our research agronomist, who will be leading us through our trial data. And then Brian Waddy, our business development lead, will give us a rundown on our commercial products. Now, I hope you're ready for a deep data dive, and let's get started. Here is Chief Product Officer Jason McNamee.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction, Devin, and sincere thank you to all of you for taking the time to be with us today. So we founded Lucent Biosciences several years ago with the express purpose to accelerate the transformation of agriculture to a truly sustainable industry. At the outset, we made the decision to develop sustainable crop nutrition products that deliver superior performance and a higher return on investment as compared to conventional products. Our first product, which we call Soileos, is a unique composition of matter whereby we have been able to attach nutrients to cellulose, which imparts a novel nutrient delivery method whereby nutrients do not tie up or leach, yet remain bioavailable. We have partnered with the food processing industry to make use of their low-value fibrous co-products, which we then upcycle, here at the top right, into our high-value commodity Soileos. In turn, Soileos is sold back to the farms where the fibers were initially grown. This circular economy model creates more value for all of the participants, including your soil. To date, we have developed and extensively tested Soileos zinc, Soileos iron, Soileos manganese, and crop-specific formulations of these products. In addition, all of our products contain approximately 10% potassium and 5% sulfur as part of our nutrition product. Next slide, please. So since our product is a water-insoluble granule, whereby the nutrients do not tie up nor leach, you're probably wondering how it actually works. Well, we thought the same thing. And so we went to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's research station located in Agassiz, British Columbia, to find out. So at this facility, the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada staff incubated several replicated soil samples with our Soileos zinc product and measured the change in microbial biomass over time. So if I could draw your attention to the graph on the left, where Soileos is represented by the blue line and the control is represented by the green line, you can see that microbial biomass increases when Soileos is applied in the soil. So what we really learned here is that microbes are using the cellulose portion of Soileos as a food source. So if you look on the image on the right, you can see that what happens in your soil is that your soil microbiome uses our products as a food source, and in this process releases bioavailable nutrients, which can then be used by your crop. So interestingly, your soil microbiome is really only effective when soil environmental conditions permit. Therefore, when your soil environment is either too cold or too wet or too hot or too dry, Soileos nutrients will not be released. However, when the conditions are just right, meaning your soil environment is warm and moist, that is when Soileos bioavailable nutrients are released by your microbiome. And this timing is really important because this is also when your crop requires nutrients. This in-time delivery mechanism allows your crops the greatest opportunity to maximize their genetic potential. The positive relationship between the product, the soil microbiome, and your crop is critical. Next slide, please. So clearly the number one advantage to the farmer is improved yield, but more important actually is an improved return on investment. We've done a lot of work on this, which we'll discuss in detail a little bit later after we discuss some of the work that we've done. But in addition to yield, our product also shows an improvement in soil fertility. And by fertility, we mean improved crop access to Soileos bioavailable nutrients. But in addition, we have also measured elevated levels of nutrients in crop tissues of other nutrients that we have not added to the soil. And we attribute this to an improvement in the health of the soil microbiome, which we expect is making previously tied up nutrients available to your crop. In addition, our natural carbon fiber product contributes carbon to your soil, helping you build your soil organic carbon profile at the same time as having a low salt index, making our products seed safe. And finally, back to our roots as founders of this company, we truly believe that development of circular economies will be one of the drivers of a sustainable future for all. Next slide, please. So how do we know these things, like actually know them? Well, we at Lucent have embarked on an intense research program to test the efficacy of our Soileos product lineup. We started with 2 little trials in 2019, which really gave us the confidence to move forward. So in 2020, we conducted 32 replicated small plot trials in Canada, from Quebec to British Columbia and all of the provinces in between. We tested a variety of broadacre and specialty crops, and the results were so promising that we expanded our research in 2021 to include not only 20 replicated small plot trials, but also trial Soileos in 30 large-scale strip plot demonstrations. Over the last 2 years, we've been testing important broadacre crops such as corn, soy, and wheat, as well as some specialty crops such as lettuce, cabbage, tomato, and strawberries, just to name a few. We've relied on third-party certified research organizations and universities to conduct the small plot trials, and our partners at Intent Agriculture to conduct the large-scale strip plot demonstration trials using their extensive grower network. So now I will hand over the reins of this webinar to our research agronomist, Laura Jeffries, to discuss some of the results of these trials.
Thanks, Jason. So as Jason mentioned, we have a fairly extensive research program that we've conducted over the last couple of years, which in 2021 included about 50 trials across Canada and the US. And Jason mentioned we had lettuce trials conducted in Quebec, we had cereals and pulses conducted across the prairies and specialty crops in British Columbia. And in the Midwest, we also had corn and soybean trials. So we've really tried to focus on significant crops in their key growing regions. And again, Jason mentioned that our testing program has consisted of 2 types of trials. We've got our replicated small plot trials and our large scale on-farm strip plot trials. So I'll go through both of these types and then present some of the data. So starting with our large scale strip trials, this program is targeted to test Soileos with real growers in real conditions. So we partnered with a great team at Intent, and we've utilized their extensive grower network to trial Soileos. So in these scenarios, we're not just testing the product on farm, but we're also able to gain the feedback from growers for their experience working with the product and their interpretation and assessment of product performance, because they know their fields the best. So for these trials, we typically ask the growers to apply the test product in a minimum of 2 strips through their field for about a 20-acre application zone. And then we compare these application strips to the grower's standard practice on this larger scale. So there's certainly less rigor in the data, but it's definitely a great way to test products on a large scale and gain feedback from our potential end users. This photo was taken this past June from one of our growers in Saskatchewan growing wheat. So this slide gives you an idea of the multiple data layers that we collect from our strip plot demonstrations. These images are taken from the Intent online platform that stores all of the data. So as the trial starts, the growers apply the product and are GPS tracking where the product goes down, as well as their planting rows. So we can tie all of the data back into these treatment zones. And you can see these strips of application zone on this map here. We've got the potential to collect NDVI imagery. That's the normalized difference vegetative index from satellites. And what this really is just a measure of greenness that is translated back to plant health. So we can collect these images over multiple time points through the season and see if there's indication of greater plant health in our applied zones. Of course, the main consideration for most growers is there an increase in yield? So we collect yield data right from the harvest monitors and the grain carts as the crop comes off the field. And an interesting layer to these trials are the SWOT maps, or the soil water topography maps that's pictured in this lower right corner here. And these maps essentially break the field down into soil zones and allows for the product performance assessment by soil zone. And this allows us to gain greater understanding of where the product is performing best. Okay, so we've got a little bit of understanding how the strip trials are conducted. So I'll start to go through some of the data. We've got photos of the 3 crops that I'll go through: corn, wheat, and soybean. And we're presenting 5 of our trials on corn. We've got 3 trials on wheat and 3 trials on soybean from this past year in 2021. So let's kind of jump into some data. But actually, before I do that, I did want to preface the data by highlighting some of the growing conditions that we experienced in 2021, because it really did impact for most of our large scale trials this past year. So this slide shows you the drought monitoring data from the US Department of Agriculture and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada as reported at the end of July. So both maps are looking at drought intensity, and we've got the scale here in the corner on the right. So in Canada, you can see that the primary agricultural regions were all affected by either a moderate to severe and even sometimes an exceptional drought scenario, especially in that south central Manitoba. As well, similar conditions in the upper Midwest states with extreme drought conditions. So if I start to overlay our trials, you can see corn, wheat, and soybean. All of these trials were located, or maybe not all, most were located in extreme areas of drought by the end of July. So you can imagine, with such limited moisture available to the crops, agriculture in general just suffered this past year. So as it applies to our trials, I mean, we're testing a fertility product. So plants don't require as many nutrients as they would in a normal year. So certainly a drought year is not the best year to test a bioactive crop nutrition product. But despite the conditions, we still have some promising results. So let's take a look at some of this data here. So in general, I'll just start off and let you know that all of our strip plot trials were comparing a Soileos product to a grower standard. So the graphs on the next 3 slides are showing the difference in yield from Soileos compared to a grower standard. So the values are that difference or that yield advantage from Soileos in bushels per acre. Now, in terms of the grower standard, this varied a little bit from site to site. So there's a little bit hidden behind these values, but for simplicity, I won't dive into those details behind the differences between the locations, but I'll just highlight a few points as they kind of apply. So for our corn trials, we're testing our Soileos zinc product. And we'll draw attention to these first 4 trials. Based on some of our previous research, we did anticipate a slightly better yield increase than we measured here, but certainly these values are still really positive. The discrepancy in the expected versus the actual results is likely chalked up to a tough growing season for the Canadian prairies and certainly Minnesota as well. To give you some reference, I've listed on the left side here, the target yield for an average growing season is about 180 to 200 bushels per acre. But our 2021 strip plot trials, the average realized yield is about 167 bushels per acre. So we see that corn crops were definitely struggling during the drought year. So if we consider this, the 4 bushel per acre increase is still quite impressive. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. What about the Indiana trial? We clearly see a remarkable yield increase of about 35 bushels per acre. I know myself, I'm all about the data. I was a little bit skeptical when this result came in, but we talked to the grower and agronomists in that area, and they confirmed that this could actually be a true response. So certainly on poor agricultural sites, when the right fertility products are used, you can see a huge yield response. So that's one of the factors here. As well, for this trial, we attribute the great response to the moisture piece. If you recall from the drought map, Indiana was not in a drought impacted zone. So generally this crop had the potential to grow well and would have taken up a lot of nutrients from the soil. And based on our soil test, we know that zinc was limited in the soil before application. So the crop certainly had the potential to benefit from Soileos zinc being added. Again, back to the moisture piece and Soileos' mode of action. Moisture is required for that active microbial community, and the product feeds microorganisms in the soil, and in turn, the nutrients are released for plant uptake. So adequate moisture equals active microbiome equals Soileos nutrients being released throughout the growing season. So this trial might seem like an outlier, but I think it really actually showcases the upper potential yield response from Soileos fertilization in the right scenarios. So if we move on to our large scale strip trials on wheat, we're again here testing Soileos zinc. And again, these trials were impacted by drought, which is especially obvious when you look at the target yields in a normal year at about 60 bushels per acre for a wheat crop, versus the average yield realized from our trials, which came in at about half that, about 30 bushels per acre. So again, truly tough year for our farmers. But despite the harsh conditions, we did measure a positive yield response at 2 of the 3 sites. And this bushel per acre increase is about 2 to 3 from our Soileos fertilized strips. So considering how much the crops did suffer in Saskatchewan, where these trials were located, it's actually a pretty great win. And I'll say too that these farmers are still benefiting with this type of yield gain. The potential return on investment with about a 2 bushel per acre increase in the wheat yield is about $5 per acre so in a drought year. Soileos is really paying for itself here. If we take a look at our soybean data, these trials are testing our Soileos soy blend, which contains both zinc and iron, and we're comparing that to the grower standard. Again, the results are modest from a tough growing season. Typically, soybean growers expect about a 50 bushel per acre crop, but in 2021, we were measuring about 20 bushel per acre from our trials. So again, all sites were impacted by drought, and generally the crops are just suffering and not utilizing the nutrients in the same way. But our Soileos soy blend was still pretty effective. We've got a yield bump about 1.5 bushels per acre, which is close to a 2x return on investment. So we are thinking if this is what's achieved using Soileos in a drought year, we're definitely excited to see the performance of Soileos products in a normal year. And with that being said, because of the poor crops across the board this past year and the mode of action of Soileos and how it's linked to moisture and the microbial activity in the soil, we think that there's still some locked up potential that's not yet measured from our 2021 applications. So really, we're anticipating that there might be a carryover effect into this next growing season. And so because we're all about the data, we want to confirm this. So we're hoping to buy back a lot of our yield files from our partner growers from 2021 and see if Soileos might have a benefit in the year after a significant drought. Okay, so I know I've been talking a lot about droughts, but I did want to circle back to this moisture piece and take a look at Soileos product performance related to moisture or lack thereof, and really see if there's an actual correlation between the two. So for this graph, I've taken our corn data from our strip plot trials and looked at the yield advantage on the vertical axis and compared this to the rain received over the growing season. I've gone a little bit further and not just looked at the total precipitation for the season, which is this orange line on the graph, but I've also broken it down into when the rain was received. So I've tested Soileos performance correlated to the early season rain. I've got that as between May and July in this light blue line. And I've also tested the performance correlated to late season rain. So if rains were received between August and October harvest, and that line is in red. So although it's a small data set, we see that there is a correlation between the total rainfall and Soileos performance. But what's more significant is when that rainfall occurs. So the correlation between Soileos performance and early season rain is highly positively correlated. So this means with adequate moisture early in the season, product performance also increases. So it does give us some indication of what to expect in a non-drought year, that if we receive sufficient or normal rainfall amounts, we anticipate that Soileos performance will be even better than what we measured in 2021. Okay, so that wraps up our large-scale on-farm trials. So I'll go through some of our replicated small plot trials. So these trials are really exciting, and it allows us to ask very specific questions about our product. The small plot trials are designed for statistical rigor so that we can gain meaningful performance data. We typically set these trials up in a randomized complete block design with 6 replicates. And the purpose for this is to try and control for some of the inherent site variability that may mask some of the crop responses that maybe you wouldn't pick up if you were conducting these on those larger scale non-replicated trials. So for the data, we collect measurements based on our research questions that include maybe stand establishment, vigor, we can do canopy greenness assessments, and of course yield. And then we've got a sampling program involved in these trials where we collect soil samples for baseline soil characterization. We collect tissue samples for assessment of plant nutrient uptake. And then at harvest, we're also collecting grain samples for grain quality analysis, which we look at nutrients, but also protein, sugars, oil content, depending on the crop. And all of this data goes into seeing if Soileos is generating a measurable response compared to either a control or a competitor treatment. This photo was actually taken from a wheat trial in Saskatoon that was conducted with ICMS this past year. Okay, let's start off by looking at 2 small plot corn trials. We've got one conducted in Manitoba and one in British Columbia, both in 2020. And the objective of these trials was to look at the yield response of corn to increasing rates of our Soileos corn blend. This corn blend contains zinc, iron, and manganese. So for these graphs, we've got treatments along the bottom with this 1x rate in both graphs, representing our recommended agronomic rate at the time of these trials, which was 15 pounds per acre. And for our Manitoba trial, we tested double that rate and 5 times that rate. And for our British Columbia, we've got a 3 times rate. So for these trials, we compared Soileos treatments to a no micronutrient control, and all of the treatments still received a standard macronutrient fertility package. And then along the vertical axis, we've got measured yield in terms of bushels per acre. So from both these graphs, you can see we've got the standard agronomic rate resulting in increased yield compared to the no micronutrient control. In Manitoba, we've got a 6 bushel per acre gain, and in British Columbia, we've got a 34 bushel per acre gain, which is huge. The corn in British Columbia was irrigated this year, so it might have something to do with such a big gain there. We see that in Manitoba, the 2x rate may demonstrate there's some missing yield potential with these higher rates, but we do see that above that, there's a bit of a plateau in the response. So we believe we're right on target with our recommended application rate for this product. So these small plot corn trials really suggest that there's a pretty healthy increase in corn yields that can be realized using our Soileos corn blend. These next trials investigate the application method of Soileos. We had this interest because some of the challenges with the distribution of micronutrients and plant access. So we know that micronutrients are essential, but the plant certainly doesn't need them in the large quantities that they do their macronutrients. So fertilizer application rates are therefore low of these micronutrients. Distribution may be poor, and then access to the nutrients also becomes a problem. So typically there's a benefit to applying your micronutrients as close to the seed as possible in either a 2x2 or an in-furrow placement. Soileos has a low salt index and a low injury risk to the developing seedlings. So in-furrow application is certainly recommended, but depending on the crop and the planting equipment, it might not always be possible. So we investigated a couple different application methods here. So for these trials, we've got one conducted in Manitoba and one in Saskatchewan on wheat, both in 2021. And we were looking at Soileos zinc applied at the agronomic rate through a broadcast and incorporate method and an in-furrow application method. And we also have a zinc sulfate, which was applied through broadcast and incorporate for comparison. What we found is in both these trials, Soileos in general was effective at increasing crop yields compared to the untreated control and even to the sulfate-based competitor. What's interesting too is that despite low application rates of Soileos, broadcast and incorporate was still very effective. So while our recommendation is still for directed placement of Soileos, we still may achieve the same or similar benefits through broadcast and incorporate. So it allows for a little bit more flexibility in product application. This next trial was conducted in Ontario on soybeans in 2021. And this trial tests the impact of individual micronutrients, zinc and iron, compared to our Soileos soy blend that contains both nutrients. We also compared the Soileos to a sulfate-based competitor and a no micronutrient control. And we found that both the individual nutrients provided a yield benefit compared to the no micronutrient control, but our soy blend was most effective with almost a 14 bushel per acre increase. Even compared to this sulfate blended competitor, we outperformed by about 4.3 bushels per acre. So from this trial, we recognize the usefulness of individual nutrient products. I mean, especially when we're trying to solve particular soil nutrient deficiencies. But in this case, especially when a deficiency is not identified, a balanced product like our Soileos soy blend can provide a benefit for promoting plant health and certainly optimizing yields. Okay, so I won't spend too much time on the specialty crops, but I did just want to highlight that we have investigated Soileos application on a range of these specialty crops, including what I've got listed here, strawberry, lettuce, and cabbage. So I'll give you a small preview of some of that data, but we are planning on doing a second webinar in the future where we can go through some of the data on these specialty crops in a bit more detail. Okay, so for a bit of a teaser, I'll show you some of this data. For strawberry, we conducted this trial in Ontario using a Soileos horticulture blend. And for this trial, we recorded about a 44% increase in the total yields with our recommended agronomic rates. We had a field trial conducted in Quebec where we were testing zinc, iron, and a blended product. And we found that our Soileos zinc iron blend resulted in a 22% yield increase compared to the untreated control and as well to that sulfate-based competitor. We also conducted a greenhouse trial, and this was with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in BC. For this trial, we tested very high application rates up to 250 milligrams of zinc per kilogram of soil. And we were testing both Soileos zinc and Soileos or zinc sulfate at these high rates. And this demonstrates that the extreme application rates where zinc sulfate was causing a phytotoxic response. So this actually didn't have that negative impact. And even though these rates are quite high, there is actually some yield potential above these standard application rates. So overall, some really interesting results on specialty crops, and Lucent will definitely continue to explore specialty crops alongside our broadacre product portfolio. Okay, so I did just want to quickly wrap up the data portion of the webinar with a quick overview of the results. I won't go over it in detail, but this table nicely demonstrates the potential yield gains from using Soileos products from some of our data collected so far. So considering our large scale trials, considering they included many drought impacted trials, we're still measuring about a 3 to a 9% increase in yields across the crops. And our small plot trials, as they were conducted in 2020 and 2021, some of this data was collected outside of a drought year. So we see that there's an even greater yield advantage that can be realized. So based on our data, moving forward, we think it's reasonable to expect that Soileos could provide a 5% or over bump in your yields in a normal growing year. And we think that's because even in a drought year, we had very respectable yield gains that weren't too far off from this. So yeah, considering our research program thus far, we've gained some great insight into the efficacy of Soileos in many regions across many crops. And we'll definitely continue an extensive research program this next year. We're going to conduct trials in a greenhouse, in field trials, both large and small scale, in Canada, US, and even further afield. So we've got a pretty ambitious program considering that we're a small startup company, but we believe product adoption always starts with proof in the data. So you now have a little bit of insight into some of our results with through product testing. So I'll hand it off to Brian Waddy, who's our business development lead. And he's going to discuss a little bit more about the product itself and how you can start using Soileos on your farm.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, folks. My name is Brian Waddy. I'm the business development lead. And I work with growers and retailers to find the best fit for Soileos in their operations. I'm here to tell you that Soileos is ready for commercial use. Soileos can be applied using standard equipment for handling dry fertilizer. The majority of our growers this year used either in-furrow placement with an air seeder or a drill, or strip till. And as Laura mentioned, we also saw an excellent response from broadcast and incorporate treatments of Soileos. A few of our growers took Soileos to their local retailers for blending and put it down with a 2x2 sideband on their planter. And Soileos had the right durability and density to be blended with other dry fertilizers, grow us growers told us that the material flowed well through their equipment, that it was easy to handle, it wasn't dusty, and retailers told us that it blended well in their systems without breaking down or settling out. Next slide, please. We also surveyed over 200 farmers with the help of Intent this year, and repeatedly yield and ROI were the top factors when evaluating new products. Keep in mind that there are other quality parameters that impact price, and micronutrients do play a role in things like protein and oil content. We don't have that data for you here today, but more to come on that front. So let's take a look at a few scenarios. In 2022, standard application of Soileos is about $12 an acre for a 12-pound application. We also saw high commodity prices for corn, wheat, and soybeans. And currently in most contract and futures markets, those prices seem like they're staying put, at least for 2022. So that's what we've included here. Then we have a column of expected yield response. And this is all based on our trial data, but considering growing conditions without a drought. Finally, we have a range of potential ROI in dollars per acre. We know that if we don't help farms create more value using Soileos, that we haven't really solved a problem for them. The team at Lucent Bio is confident that we've developed products that work. So ask us about our performance guarantees for the 2022 growing season. Pictured in the bottom here is an image of the pellet, just for people that are wondering what Soileos looks like. Thank you. We have lots of exciting work in progress. As Laura mentioned, we're continuing to expand our R&D program. This includes a deeper dive into how Soileos impacts the microbiome and soil carbon. In terms of the soil microbiome, we know overall it increases and the mode of action leads to great results, but are there specific microbes being promoted, and what are the secondary effects of that? If we combine Soileos with other biological products, is there an even better response than either product on their own? We'll have to do the research to find out, but it's part of our research program for 2022 to dive deeper into the soil genomics, and we think this is a very promising endeavor. When we add cellulose to the soil and promote more microbial life, we also add carbon to one of the planet's largest and most powerful carbon sinks. Exactly how much is added and how long it lasts depends on a number of factors, including farm practices, but we're working with arm-length consultants to dive deeper into this topic, so stay tuned for our carbon accounting. We're also working on new formulations, and this includes adding copper and boron to our portfolio of bioactive crop nutrition products. We're also working on regional and crop-specific blends that are meant to cover all your bases and get your crop off to the best start possible by providing a package of bioavailable nutrients throughout the growing season. And finally, when it comes to running an agribusiness, we understand that logistics can trump agronomics. So we're looking at ways to make Soileos more accessible to growers and retailers through additional product forms. We've been working on seed treatments as well as fertilizer coatings to improve distribution and provide more ways for growers to get Soileos onto their fields. With that, I will pass the webinar back over to Devin to bring us home.
Thank you so very much, speakers, and we hope you all enjoyed the presentation. Now we've got a couple questions in the pipeline. Brian and the team will help us answer those. So let's get started. One anonymous attendee asked, are these small plot numbers averages of the small plots or data from just one small plot?
Yeah, so on the slides where I was showing the graph, those were numbers from just one small plot trial at a time. The summary graph, I did take an average across all of our small plot trials for that particular crop. And because there's quite a few different treatments within these small plot trials, I took the agronomic rate and compared that to the untreated control in those scenarios. we have a data scientist on our team that's at this time trying to compile all of our 2020 and 21 data to really pull out some of the details and have that statistical rigor behind different trends in the data too.
Laura, while I have you, there's another question from an anonymous attendee. Did you measure the above ground biomass?
Depends on the trial. So not for our broadacre crops, but for our cabbage trial that was conducted with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, we definitely took the above ground biomass for that trial. We did take other measurements. So for our corn trials, I just presented the grain yield, but we also looked at silage in our British Columbia 2020 trial. So there's certainly more data that we didn't cover in this webinar.
Thank you, Laura. We have another couple questions that Jason actually typed an answer, but I think they're important, so I'm going to bring them up here. One was, can you tell me what the control was? So no fertilizer, Soileos without nutrient, generic competitor. Jason, you had typed this one up. Do you want me to read it? Or?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, Jason. Jason's response was, the control varies between trials due to standard practices of the farmer or the contract research organizer. Typically, the control in our trials was a grower standard practice, which usually includes macronutrients, NPK, and sometimes an S, and sometimes other nutrients. Laura, did you want to expand on that at all?
I think that's a pretty good answer. Yeah, I'll just echo, it does vary depending on the site. So in all of our trials, for our small plot, really we're focusing on the difference between the micros. So we try and keep the macronutrient program the same across all treatments. But again, for our large scale trials, it does vary depending on the standard practices of that grower.
Thanks, Laura. I had another question was, have we ever tested on citrus trees? And what was the average pH of the field that we had in our trials?
We have not tested on citrus trees, to my knowledge. I don't know if the pH question is still relevant, having not conducted on citrus trees, but we've certainly tested on a range of pH for our broadacre crops. In Manitoba, we saw a pH as high as 8.2, I believe, but certainly a lot of our soils are around a 7 pH.
Thank you, Laura. We have another question in the chat. Is the reason the large plot results generally less powerful because versus the small plots was more heavily weighted in the 2020 growing season, i.e. less drought?
Sorry, let me read that question again.
Yeah, so
because the small plot was heavily weighted. So there's a number of factors that go into maybe answering this question. The large scale trials, for a lot of our growers, they are just applying the Soileos treatment in 1 or 2 strips. A couple did a few more, but there's less power because we only have a couple numbers, 1 grower standard and 1 Soileos treatment to kind of figure out what the data is saying. Whereas even if you remember from one of the slides, even in our 2021 wheat trial that was also impacted by drought, we did see a better response from our Soileos treatment because it's on a smaller scale, it's replicated. So rather than just 1 number, we're looking at 6 numbers for that same treatment, and you can gain power that way. Because really you look at the total bushels of that crop, and our small plot trials were still yielding pretty low because of the drought. But certainly overall, the small plot trials, when we're averaging the yield response, when we pull in that 2020 data, we have some really strong results from the non-drought year as well.
Thank you for clarifying that, Laura. And we have maybe one last question. Is Soileos available for community or home gardens? And will it be available in the future, or is it strictly for large farms?
I can answer that one. How about, so currently our target market is large scale farms, commercial growers, but we do have product that we do expect to roll out into the retail home and garden market, but we're still a couple of years away from making that a reality.
Awesome. If there's any more questions, type them in now, or you can always message us on any of our socials or email us. Oh, here's one. Oh, have we been tested on citrus? I believe Laura answered that, and we have not.
Well, I would add to that, Devin, we have not, but we are interested in trying that. So if you're somebody who is growing citrus somewhere and is interested in testing the product or working with us to conduct a test, please follow up with us. We're interested in working with you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, everybody, for answering all those questions. And thank you, speakers, for a great presentation. We have a brief survey that's going to pop up right after this, and we would really appreciate it to get some of your responses, just so that we know how to do this better in the future, and maybe we can answer some more questions that you have for us. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you learned and enjoyed our presentation.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.